All right, everyone. We start off today talking about the continuing educational conundrum. And this is a little bit of a conflicting issue when we're talking about campus protests, student groups, and so forth, campus free speech. Israel is definitely involved in this. There's no real surprise there. The current administration, the Trump administration, is trying to remove federal funding from universities if they don't do enough to combat anti-Semitism. I notice that if students are protesting against Palestinians, or they're protesting against Bolivians or something like that, nothing is done. With Israel, it's an entirely different story. This has to do partially with partisan politics, by the way. I find it regrettable. That being said, I do have to point out the hypocrisy of some of these colleges and universities when for years and years and years they have suppressed campus free speech. And all of a sudden, though, there's one particular issue on which they demand free speech. They demand, taxpayer money on. That's the ability to criticize Israel, as opposed to, again, any other country in the world, any other group in the world. It's uniquely Israel. It's uniquely the Jews. It's very, very strange to me, actually. I find it very funny that the same colleges that have dumbed people down intellectually and suppressed and censored as much as they possibly can in many cases certain political ideologies, uh, usually libertarian ones or conservative ones, all of a sudden are very much gung-ho for free speech, only because of the Jews, basically. I find that very interesting. Now, here's my take on it. I believe that students should be able to speak their mind. If they want to criticize Israel, fine. If they want to criticize literally anyone else, they're criticizing Koreans or Canadians, probably in the latter case, sometimes deserve it. Australians, if they want to criticize the U.S. government, they should be able to do so. They should be able to do this individually. They should be able to literally erect a fucking soapbox, stand on it on the street corner, and ramble about whatever political beliefs they happen to have. Doesn't matter what they happen to be. I don't care if they're a goddamn Soviet. I don't care if they're a tanky. They should be able to form student unions, student groups, whether official or unofficial. As far as federal funding goes, it's a mixed bag sort of issue. This is the nuance channel, so we're going to try to actually explain the situation. What the Trump administration is doing is trying to remove federal funding effectively from colleges and universities based on, what they do with regards to specifically, and this is again slightly telling, anti-Semitism. There is a fine line between criticism of Israel and fucking hating Jews and wanting them to die and stuff like that. Two things are not the same. If somebody is merely criticizing the actions of the Israeli government, I don't understand why there would be a problem with this. Trump administration, unfortunately, appears to be conflating the two. Now, if you're sitting on the corner seat hiling and saying, "Kill the Jews," or something like that, dressed as Hitler or something like that, I can understand why that particular student group might be conceived of as problematic. While it is still free speech, federal funding probably shouldn't be going to promote that student group. When Heinrich Himmler forms a student group, there might be a problem. But if it is simply criticism of the government of Israel or of Israeli policy in general, so critical of the IDF, critical of Mossad, and so forth, I don't understand why that would be a reason to withdraw federal funding from that university. The fact that Harvard or some other university or college might allow students to gather together and criticize the IDF, for example, or proclaim that Israel is involved in war crimes, that's free speech. It's free expression. I don't understand why it would be conceived of as problematic at all. But for some reason, it's conceived of as problematic. I have a problem with this. I believe people should be able to express themselves. Now, I would say federal funding shouldn't go to any college or university. Here's the easy solution. Just withdraw it from every one of them because they don't need it. They should operate in a free market atmosphere. That's what I would conceive of. So you don't need taxpayer money to fund people in their student groups or whatever. It's not necessary. Maybe for topical purposes, for their very existence. Beyond that, they should operate in a free market atmosphere. They should be competing amongst themselves, um, generally speaking. That would be a much better solution. So you don't make it conditional. You simply say, we're not going to fund you at all. Any of you. Doesn't matter, if your university allows people to spew hatred, that's fine. Go ahead. Your university does not allow people to express themselves. That's fine too. Neither of you need any money whatsoever. Yeah, we could reduce the tax rate, I suppose, and probably allow a lot more kids to actually get an education, ironically speaking. Um, Go ahead and have whatever organizations or functions you want to have, but they're not going to be federally funded. If the state wants to fund them under the 10th Amendment, they have the right to do so. And by the way, that's not in the federal government's purview. Perfectly fine. You're funding a student group and that the group of students decide that they are anti-Israel or something. I don't give a shit. It has nothing to do with me. I'm not a member of the student group. And I'm probably not in the state where that student group exists anyway, so it does not affect me. Perfectly fine. Federal money shouldn't be given to higher educational structures at all. A lot of these, especially the ivory tower places, the Ivy League places, they get a shit ton of private investment. They have, in some cases, billion-dollar endowments. Well, then why do they need my money specifically? Why should my money be going, by the way, to a college or university that's outside of my state? What do I have to do with you? You're 500 miles away and yet I'm funding you. It makes very little sense. The current structure is generally deficient. And part of this is the freedom of expression argument. I believe that people should be able to criticize the government of Israel. I do not believe that that should be a requisite. The college has to ban people from criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu in order to get an education. That's questionable, to say the least. I'm not a fan of that. I question Benjamin Netanyahu all the time. Does that mean that I couldn't go back to college if I wanted to? Well, you're not allowed to say that. Oh, I'm allowed to criticize Trudeau. I'm allowed to criticize, Millet or anyone else in the world other than Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm allowed to criticize the military actions of literally any country in the world other than Israel. I have begun to notice that this is a trend, especially among people who are on the right wing of politics. I do not need to unequivocally and unilaterally support the state of Israel. It is not necessary. You do not need to hate Jews. You do not need to hate Jewishness in order to criticize the government of Israel. For instance, I'm probably going to get bagels with lox on them later. Delicious, by the way. Jewish food is actually exquisite. That doesn't mean that I have to have some sort of love for Benjamin Netanyahu or his cabinet. But I don't. Even some members of his own nation, you will notice, do not really support him. The fact that he's waging what is conceived of being as a moral war, although there's no such thing, doesn't mean he's beyond reproach. He also got drawn up on corruption charges a few years ago. Apparently, he and his wife were squirreling away a bunch of money or something like that. I can't remember the exact charge, but they were brought up on charges. He was almost kicked out of the government entirely. So this is not a man who is beyond reproach. This is not an administration that is beyond reproach. They are capable of the fact that you're fighting Hamas. Okay, Hamas is not exactly a humanitarian group or something like that. That's great. You're fighting a group that is pretty terroristic. That doesn't mean that all of your actions of necessity are correct. For example, when the United States went into Vietnam, we were attempting to guard against communism. That doesn't mean that the My Lai massacre and things like that were justified. It doesn't mean that all of the decisions that were made by the US government were justified. It doesn't mean anything. The fact is war is hell, and war never changes. And we have that going on exactly at this moment as well. And so you have this weird conundrum within the educational system. We're talking about free expression versus, not hating people to the point where they're getting beaten in the streets and stuff like that. I would simply say, don't give any federal aid to any of these educational institutions under any circumstances. Withdraw all federal support, regardless of their policies with regards to anti-Semitism, because it means nothing. My taxpayer money doesn't need to be going to people who want to beat Jews up in the street. It doesn't need to go to educational structures where there's a student group that is supporting Hamas. I'm not interested in that. Just let me keep my money because I can probably use it better than these educational institutions can, so-called, anyway. That's about all. Peace out.